In this lesson, we're going to take the time to cover a couple of operators called the switch and a ternary operator. Now this may be new to some of you, and that's okay. If not, it may be a simple review for some of you as well. But if this is new to you, consider this your first official Beyond the Basic topic. So let's go ahead and get the switch and ternary operators project loaded up into our Eclipse IDE if you'd like to work along with me on this project. Once again, we'll note that we have our runner, swimmer, utilities class, and a switch and ternary operators driver class, which we'll get to in just a moment. So a quick review of our runner object: a race ID as an integer and name as a string, only the default constructor, mutators and accessors or getters and setters for the name and ID, performance sport, which will give you a running string, and our toString, which just reports the state containing the name, the race ID, and the fact that they're running. Swimmer, again, has race ID and name, the default constructor, and the explicit constructor that takes in the racer ID and the swimmer name, mutators and accessors for race ID and name, performing sport, which will return swimming, and the toString method, which of course returns the name, race ID, and perform sport. In our utilities class, however, we're going to change some code a little bit. So here before we had our conditional operator, which was if 1 equals null, return 2 equals null, else return 1 dot equals 2. But now what we're going to do is use what's called a ternary operator. And again, if this is new to you, that's perfectly okay. So how does a ternary operator work? Well, the first thing we do is we have our conditional check. We could have set this into a variable. We don't necessarily have to return it. But since all I'm doing in this method is returning this, I'm just going to return the value of whatever is evaluated in this entire ternary operator. And the first part, again, is my conditional check. You could say this as if 1 equals null, and then we have a question mark, which kind of stands for then, return, because we're returning or set into a variable, 2 equals null. So here we're basically going to evaluate. If 1 equals null, then give me the result of 2 equals null. And here we could say this colon as otherwise or else. So if 1 equals null, then do this, otherwise do this. So if 1 is not equal to null, then we'll go to 1 dot equals 2, and we'll get the result of that. So essentially what we've done is wrap the entire if-else statement into one line of code, giving us what's called a ternary operator, returning those values. Now this is really handy in the condition like we have here, where our statements are very simple. But of course, if we had to do more in the if and the else block, a ternary operator would not be the best choice. But it is something we want to have on our radar as professional Java developers, because it's much easier to read, saves code, and will be more popular in a professional environment. So finally, the last thing I want to do is take a review or a look at the switch operator if you've never seen this before. So again, just to get started on this driver, we do have our runner, we do have our swimmers, and we set some values, with one of them having a null name, and eventually we're going to run against that ternary operator to make sure that that still works the way we expect it to. Now we'll get to that in just a moment. First, I want to look at the switch. So how does a switch work? Well, here what we're going to do is we're going to give the user a menu. And the menu will give them the choice that they can enter 1 for adding a runner, enter 2 for a swimmer, or entering 3 to quit. And we'll return that result of whatever they choose from this menu. And we'll store that into a variable called menu choice as an integer. And then what we can do is run what's called a switch on that choice, taking the menu choice value, either 1, 2, or 3 that they've returned, and then doing something based on what they actually gave us. So when we have a switch, just like an if-else block or a loop or any other method or class in Java, we're going to wrap the body of the switch in curly braces. And you can see they line up here. And then for every possible input, we want to create what's called a case. So here we have case 1, and then eventually we'll have case 2, case 3, and we have this default down here. What's the default for? That's going to handle in case menu choice isn't 1, 2, or 3. So if they give us something bad for some reason, we could do other code down here. Which means that we could also default to a case. If we, for example, wanted to say that if they give us a bad input, we'll just either quit or add a runner or add a swimmer, we could put that code here again, and we could handle that. Otherwise, we can just leave it alone and just say, well, you gave me something bad, so I'm just going to go ahead and exit out. And here again, at the end of each statement, we also note there's a break. Now this break statement tells us that case 1 is done, case 2 is done, case 3 is done. And if we don't have those, what happens is it cascades into the one below it. And so what would happen here is case 3 would run, and then it would actually run the default, if the compiler will let us get away with that, which most of the time we can. But we'll go ahead and just make sure that we put a break at the end of each of our case statements. We now have our menu choice in place, and whatever is returned, that switch will operate. So let's go ahead and run our code, and we'll see, first of all, that of course our ternary operator is still working, and then we'll take a look at running it a couple times to add a swimmer, add a runner, and actually quit as the user gives us input. We do have two more methods, get new runner and get new swimmer, which are simply going to take input from the user to create our runner or our swimmer object as expected. And you can look at that code on your own time as well if you want to see it in more detail. But here we have all of our ternary operators still working the way that we expected. And now our menu prints out what would we like to do today. Let's add a new runner, and we'll create the runner called Tom. And we'll have the race ID of the runner be 765432. And we see we created the runner Tom, 765432 is running. That's the end of our program. So we may want to add in a little bit of code here at the end just so that we know that we're at the end. And let's run it again. This time let's add a swimmer. And the swimmer will be Sally. And let's do the race ID of the swimmer to be 123456. And there we created swimmer Sally. 123456 is swimming, and the program is complete. And once again, just to make sure that our switch operation is working for when we want to quit, we'll just go ahead and quit. Thank you for using Infinite Skills. And our default case, if they give us something that's not 1, 2, or 3, complete. So we're done. That wraps up our quick review of using a ternary operator and a switch. And again, if that was new material to you, consider it your first Beyond the Basic topic, and hopefully you will be able to quickly adapt and use those different operators in your code where appropriate.